Something that I always explain to my clients as well is often when people are unhappy, they think the way out is happiness, but actually there's a step in between, and I call this a neutral place. If you say to somebody right from the outset, let's put more joy back into your life, and they're like, how can I have more joy in my life when the baby, in fact, I always say as well to my clients that we shouldn't see a baby as the thing to bring the joy into our life. A baby's there to come in and enhance that. And when they're thinking about how do I possibly get that joy back in my life again, they jump to happiness. But there is this in-between space, which is kind of neutral. And if we work to there, we then have the emotional capacity to start thinking about joy again.
So that was Dany Griffiths, who is our guest today. And Dany created the Freedom Fertility Formula, which is what she's talking about in this episode today. And it's what I've been training in. And you'll know if you've been following me on my social that I've been saying I've nearly finished and I've now qualified. And on the 13th of July, I'm launching a really exciting challenge in my closed Facebook group called Talk Fertility. So make sure you check out the show notes to find the details, the little link of how you can register, because I'd love to have you there to join in 5 days of brilliant tasks to get you thinking about your emotional well-being. Plus, I've got an amazing prize. It's called, I'm calling it a fertility checkup kit. And it's basically got a consultation from our lovely Kate. It's also got a consultation from Mel Brown, the nutritionist. It has got a Exceed sperm test, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And it also has a brilliant fertility test from Medichecks, who are one of our sponsors, because we want to make sure you are totally empowered in knowing as much as you can about your fertility. And Medichecks have got this whole range of fertility tests that Kate can tell you more about.
The great thing about Medichecks tests is that it really doesn't matter where in your fertility journey you are. You might be at the beginning of your fertility journey and wanting to find out a bit of information about your fertility, or you might be about to start on fertility treatment and want to get all the tests done prior to starting your treatment. And therefore, these tests are great because you can use them at various different times.
Thank you again to Medichecks for continuing to sponsor the podcast. They have this range of simple home blood tests developed with our very own Kate Davis. So just visit medichecks.com to find out more. Now it's time to crack on with the episode. Welcome to the Fertility Podcast. I'm Natalie Silverman, your host. I've been using my voice in my work for about 15 years now. I used to be on the radio. Now I'm podcasting and do a lot of voiceover work. Now, the Fertility Podcast has a whole host of episodes for you, from adenomyosis to zero sperm. It's a total A to Z of all sorts of things that affect you on your fertility journey. I'm mum to a little boy called Phoenix after having successful ICSI treatment, and that was my reason for starting the podcast. And I hope that if you found us, then you'll realise that you are not alone. This podcast is to help educate and empower you. I've brought together as many experts and tried to share as many of your stories as possible. And I now have my wonderful co-host.
I'm Kate Davis, a fertility nurse consultant, and I'm adamant that we can all do so much better at understanding our fertility. I'm really passionate about teaching you to take ownership of your fertility, teaching you practical steps, emotional coping strategies, and lifestyle changes that you can make to hopefully optimise your chances of conceiving.
Now you know who we are. All you need to do is enjoy the show. Well, this is exciting. So we're now going to have a chat with Dany Griffiths, who is my kind of coach, mentor in the training I've been doing to become a Freedom Fertility Specialist. And I wanted Kate and Dany and myself to just talk about, first of all, the work that I've been doing, but I also want to try and show the difference in support in what Kate does and what Dany does. So Dany, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Natalie. It's lovely to be here.
And it's quite exciting for me because Dany and I have been in touch for a good year or so as I've been trying to work my way through Dany's material, and I'm nearly at the end of it as we speak. Today is the last of my sessions with my case study, and I'm about to launch myself into the world finally.
Yay! Yes, finally, Natalie, finally.
Definitely finally.
I know. Well, a lot of it is to do with my own confidence, which we'll talk about later. But Dany, let's just start with you and your background, because you've come to this from a real personal point of view as well. And you've got a background in more of the hypnosis side. So tell me a bit about you in terms of what made you start to create the Freedom Fertility Formula.
Okay. Well, in terms of why I'm so passionate about this work, that doesn't come from a personal journey of having been through a fertility struggle. That comes through my best friend, Sarita, who had a journey of over 10 years. And as a hypnotherapist, when I started to realise just how much of an impact her journey was having on her, I started looking for solutions. And I think the universe was in sync with me, because as soon as I started looking, I received an email saying, would you like to do training in hypno-fertility? So this was training specifically for hypnotherapists to support those struggling with fertility issues. So that's kind of how I ended up doing this work. And to be honest with you, it was really just focused on helping Sarita. I wasn't ever thinking that this was going to become my big passion. And when I worked with her with hypnofertility, it was very much focused on the mind-body connection. So we were doing a lot of work around making sure there were no emotional blocks, that she was using her imagination, if you like, to work with her body, to help her body getting the most fertile state. So that's kind of where we started that journey together. And she actually became pregnant soon after we started working together, after 10 years and 5 IVF cycles. So that was amazing. Sadly, she lost that baby, but then she was very determined to go on this journey of seeing if natural conception could work for her. And she's now got 2 amazing kids. So if that's where my journey had ended, that would have been absolutely fine, you know. But Sarita then started sending people to me. So you will know, as someone who has struggled with fertility journey yourself, and I know you're doing this as part of your work, but even aside of that, you meet other people, don't you? So just in natural conversation, you meet people who are struggling. And this is what was happening to Sarita. So she was saying, you must go and see Dany. So I ended up seeing more and more clients, and it became a thing. And I started working with hypno-fertility. However, my driving passion is actually emotional well-being. And something I was seeing a lot of was obviously the distress that came with a fertility struggle. And because one of my top values is fairness, I really struggled when I saw kind of promotions from people saying, do this work and you will get pregnant, or, you know, we can't guarantee success, but 98% of my clients are getting pregnant. And actually Sarita would say to people, you must go and see Dany, she's a miracle worker. And as more and more of my clients were getting pregnant, they were saying the same thing. And always in my mind, I was thinking, but what about the people who don't get pregnant quickly? What about those who don't ever get pregnant? And I really cared about them as well. So for me, the Freedom Fertility Formula, first and foremost, is there to get people to a place of strength where they're handling their everyday life, where they're able to cope with the things that are going on, to explore the feelings they've got, not to think that some things are good and some things are bad, but that they're all useful. You know, we just had a post on our Freedom Fertility Emotional Wellbeing group, someone sharing how distressing it was for her to have her sister-in-law share that she was pregnant, and is this normal? And then after everyone was saying, yes, of course it's normal, she then apologised for bringing negativity into the group. And I'm like, no, you know, it's not about some feelings are negative. All of these feelings are important. So it was about marrying up the two for me when I was looking to put together the Freedom Fertility Formula. So using the mind-body connection work, because I know it makes a difference to helping people with fertility success, but also bringing in the emotional well-being aspect as well.
And Kate, I wanted to just bring you in here because Kate works with women on a day-to-day basis as well, is a practitioner for natural fertility in the work she does. That stress and that distress that Dany talks about, I'm assuming that you see that day to day in the conversations whilst you're trying to help women understand their cycles more, because you're looking at the body as well as the mind, aren't you, when we're talking about this connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think predominantly because of my nursing background and the fact that I, have been in this field for over 20 years, my approach is very much looking at the more physical aspects and how you can optimize your fertility to conceive, or with PCOS, working with women with PCOS and improving and controlling their PCOS. So my approach predominantly comes from that. But a bit like Dany's talking about, I felt that I had all of that knowledge, but actually, although I'd worked with many women over the 20 odd years that had gone through fertility and had the empathy, I didn't have the skills really. I wasn't a trained counsellor at that point. I wasn't a trained coach. So I felt that I needed to bring in the coaching aspect to complement what I already do. And that was great for me. I think how my approach is obviously very different to Dany is that I see women from that point of view, from the physical aspects, and I bring in some of the emotional. So I'm not a true coach because I can't always take my clinical hat off. I think it's more of a mentorship that I'm providing rather than a coaching, because it's impossible for me to separate the two. I can't do it.
Just going to say, I know that you've made a real mission to not have the word coaching in the work that we're doing. We're termed as Freedom Fertility Specialist. And I'm interested in you just explaining that a bit more, because as I'm about to launch myself, and I have been saying I've been training to be a fertility coach for a while, because I don't quite know if I'm just not surrounding it with all the other info, how I explain that specialist. So just tell us a bit about, because you were quite adamant about that word, weren't you?
Yeah, originally everyone was called a Freedom Fertility Formula coach. And I think there's the important piece, not fertility coaches, Freedom Fertility Formula coaches. But I found that people were saying they were fertility coaches, which I will get onto in a moment as to why it's important to have a difference. So I thought, well, if I take the word coach out altogether, then people are not going to say they're fertility coaches. They're going to say they're Freedom Fertility Formula Specialists. Now, the reason this is important is that when someone hears the words fertility coach, that creates something in their mind as to what that might be. And particularly in the case of Freedom Fertility Formula, that thought will be wrong. And even for other people who are saying they're fertility coaches, they all work differently. Okay. So the important thing is to be recognised as a Freedom Fertility Formula Specialist, so people are curious about what that means. Okay. So what that actually means is the Freedom Fertility Formula is a unique blend of counselling, coaching, and mind-body connection type tools and techniques. I have a hypnotherapy background, but I don't tend to use the word hypnosis because, again, that conjures up thoughts in people's minds as to what that might mean. Okay, so it's about understanding that this is a different way. So first and foremost, from the counselling perspective, we're hearing, that the very first thing we do is to hear somebody's story of pain. Because for a lot of women, that's not heard. They don't share it. It's a big secret. So we start off from that place of listening to understand, so that we can then draw a line in the sand, if you like, and build out a strategy for them with regards to how they can move forward. So this is where the coaching comes in. So that when we're starting to say, how do you want your life to be? And of course, the mind-body connection comes in, because this work does support them getting pregnant. So often we say mind-body, but it's body-mind. So by working on the mind, you can influence the body. Sometimes we look at the body to influence the mind. And it's a complete combination of these things to help a person. And the way I see it is that obviously people are coming to us because they want to get pregnant. But actually, and you know this because you've done a similar survey to me, when you are so struggling, what is the one thing that they would love is to be able to handle the day-to-day. Now, the interesting thing for me is that as a hypnotherapist, as someone who's fully focused on how the mind influences the body, if we help a person take care of themselves and are giving them tools and techniques and strategies to help them handle that day-to-day, it will then support that mind-body connection. So this is why I don't say call yourself a fertility coach, because, some fertility coaches will bring in nutrition. I would say when I explore what people are doing with fertility coaching, there's still a big emphasis on what's happening in the body first. The person is kind of second rate, if you like, to making sure that the body's okay. But for me personally, I think if we don't look after the emotional well-being, everything else is compromised.
Absolutely. I think we always consider the physical aspects first. Women will be going through, seeing their doctors, going through seeing a consultant, seeing fertility treatments, and we always consider those physical aspects first. And all the while we're doing that, the mind is suffering. And so to bring those two and have those two together is so vitally important. And that's why I don't call myself a coach. I call myself a fertility nurse consultant, because I'm looking at it in the holistic way, which I think is so much more important for me anyway, than from the way I practice. For me, that is what I have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Natalie, as you know, my big thing, like I've never actually worked as a traditional hypnotherapist anyway, and my massive passion is about helping people to understand emotions more usefully, even where there's a lot of emotions education these days. I don't believe it's done particularly well. I think people are still in the camp of good and bad. So that's a massive driver for me. So although we are talking about the mind, it's about our emotional well-being, which actually connects both.
So with that in mind, the emotions module within the Freedom Fertility Formula is a big part of it. And I'd like you to explain that to somebody in terms of what they can expect from it, because it is, I think, quite a life-changing focus. Okay. How would you explain it?
So when we actually get down to the nitty-gritty of the emotions work, it's actually in session 3, but it's filtered through every single session. So obviously we come with our feelings to every session. However, when we get to the actual emotions module, the big focus there is helping people to appreciate that our emotions are actually our guiding force, if you like. So we're taught that some emotions are good and some are bad, which means that we naturally either squash down difficult feelings or distract ourselves from them. And then they keep recurring, they keep turning up, because actually the way emotions get released is by taking action. So I often use the analogy of going back to cave person times and how, it was very simple for them to be able to follow their feelings, because it came down very simply to what's safe and what's dangerous. And often you'll hear people talk about the fight, flight, freeze response. And what I realized actually is that if you think about, and you see it in animals, if you think about feelings from a cave person's perspective, yes, there was that immediate, I'm in danger, or okay, I'm fine, I'm safe. But there was also this almost preparing for seasonal changes or noticing that things change. So it's not a conscious analytical thing like it is with us to make decisions, but there were emotions driving their actions from a preparing perspective. And so I felt that when people talk about emotions and this fight, flight, freeze, and looking at how to understand emotions, that piece was missing. So that part of using our feelings to guide us is missing. And what I put together was a way of saying, right, okay, we know we squash down the difficult feelings. So first and foremost, we have to notice them. We have to use the conscious analytical brain that we have now, that the caveman didn't have, to say, I'm going to consciously notice these feelings. I'm going to consciously notice these triggers when they turn up. But then saying, I'm going to thank these feelings, because actually it gives us power. If we thank a feeling, if we're feeling angry or hurt or upset, and we go, thank you for turning up to help me, immediately we take the power back, because there is a massive difference between feeling emotionally in control and controlling our emotions. People squashing down their feelings, people distracting themselves, they're controlling those feelings. But sometimes we unravel people actually, because they're used to controlling them, and we're saying, set them out, let them free. So then we bring in this kind of analysis piece to say, how does this feeling want to help us? And then the most important part is to take action. So once we've acknowledged that, now this sounds like a lengthy process, and when we do it for the first time in a session, it feels like it, but actually I do this with every single feeling that comes through to me. So anytime I notice something's triggered me, I will explore that feeling, because this is how we continually allow our feelings to guide us towards the next best step to take. Now, there are other aspects which we then move on to in the next session, which is about looking at emotional lessons that we've learned from the past, which are no longer useful. And then we can use the kind of, it's a hypnosis technique, if you like, but we use a technique where we can release negative emotional blocks at a subconscious level. But the first thing we must do is to start looking at it consciously, because both the conscious mind and the subconscious mind have to be working together in order to help us continually move forward in the best way.
Just thinking like that is quite life-changing, and I think it's part of the process that I've been going through that has taken me the longest period of time, because I wanted to feel comfortable within it all in myself, with all the things that it has brought up, to be able to then understand it, to process it, to hopefully teach other people about it.
I completely agree with that, because when I did my training, I really could see how that training affected me and changed my outlook on things. So often I think I would perhaps in the past have been a bit less optimistic, I suppose. I'd have been probably a bit more pessimistic, maybe had some negative tendencies. And actually now I try and actually maintain quite a positive attitude and a positive outlook on life. And I've learned to do that. And I wouldn't say, because I think, we're not always good at doing it ourselves, even though we're teaching it, we're not always brilliant at doing it ourselves. But definitely the tools that I learned during my training have really helped. And I loved it actually, Dany, when you mentioned about your values, and actually doing a values exercise for me was such a breakthrough, suddenly realizing that what my core values were and why in situations I suddenly felt really, really uncomfortable, it's because it didn't align with my values. And just that little bit of knowledge was incredible. It was like a eureka moment for me.
I think something that's interesting as well, and it came up actually in the supervision session that I was doing with some of my Freedom Fertility Formula specialists, was this idea of being positive and optimistic. And one of the specialists on the call, she was actually a previous client of mine from quite a few years back. So when I was more doing hypno-fertility rather than having created my own formula, if you like. And so she was saying that in a certain sense, when she was more positive, every month when her period came through and she wasn't pregnant, she actually crashed harder. And we explored that a little bit on the call, because I said, actually now I talk about something called the downward cycle of despair, because if we're looking to truly appreciate that all our feelings are useful, sometimes people can be almost too optimistic and too positive.
It has to be a balance.
And myself personally, and most of the clients I attract, we're very good at toughing it out. So we're good at kind of squashing the feelings down. So I think that part of the learning for both our clients and also all of my specialists, we go through a process where they use the tools and techniques for themselves. So as we're training, because they're tools for life, we literally do say, let's work on you whilst we're going through this training. But it's saying that actually you don't always have to be positive.
No, of course you don't.
And it's about saying, how do I feel right now in this moment, and exploring why. In fact, I had this great chat with my daughter the other day, because last week, very unusually for me actually, I felt really fed up for 2 days, really fed up. And I'm actually very good at using all my tools and techniques, because then I feel like, I can say to people, I know this stuff works, and I just sat with it because I thought, I'm so fed up. And I said to Evan, do you ever just feel like crying for no reason? And she looked at me, she's nearly 13. She was a bit bemused at that. And then she said, what might be the reason? And I thought, do you know what? I love the fact that she just came back at me with just this beautiful, simple little question that lifted me very gently out of this feeling of
how you were feeling,
fed upness, to, not saying you should be feeling in a different way or telling me how I could feel a different way, but just like, what might be the reason, Mummy,
Oh, bless her.
And I think for me, that in that moment, I thought, this is the work. This is why I love this work so much, because it isn't about saying we should be feeling a certain way. It's about saying, how do we feel right now? And what might be the reason for that,
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing you can say to a fertility patient is, try and be positive, because it's impossible. You can't always be positive, but having that balance is so important. And my take on it very much is that I find lots of women have life on hold. Their life is on hold. They're not doing all the things that make them feel joyful. And actually doing things to make yourself feel joyful is going to naturally raise your how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the process. So putting that joy back into life is so important. So I think it's almost more important to be joyful than positive. Just allow that joy to come back.
Totally. And in fact, one of the things we do say with the Freedom Fertility Formula, it's about helping you to reclaim the joy in life again. And something that I always explain to my clients as well is often when people are unhappy, they think the way out is happiness. But actually, there's a step in between, and I call this a neutral place. If you say to somebody right from the outset, let's put more joy back into your life, and they're like, how can I have more joy in my life when the baby, in fact, I always say as well to my clients that we shouldn't see a baby as the thing to bring the joy into our life. A baby's there to come in and enhance that. And when they're thinking about how do I possibly get that joy back in my life again, they jump to happiness. But there is this in-between space, which is kind of neutral. And if we work to there, we then have the emotional capacity to start thinking about joy again. And it's gentle steps. We have a thing called the Positive Pathway Planner, where it's literally saying little tiny micro steps. What's going to make you happy in this moment? It doesn't have to be huge. And the beauty of this stuff, and this is what I love about it so much, is that we're helping them live their lives again. So we're helping them to get back, just daily life, getting the joy back there. But we've had people saying they're finally booked in their weddings. You said life on hold. They're finally booking in their weddings. They're having that big holiday they wanted, so they've stopped putting their lives on hold. But I know from a mind-body connection perspective, this is also helping their fertility success, which is why we see the fertility success. One of the problems that we have with our trainees is that often they'll be partway through a case study and someone gets pregnant. And it's like, yay, what a brilliant problem to have. But then I want to balance that out with also not raising expectation to the point where when something doesn't happen fast enough for a person, they spiral back down again. It's about a nice even keel. And I think by being able to acknowledge the difficult days, along being able to be positive, as well as saying, some days I'm just going to feel fed up. Yeah, absolutely. And that's okay. Then we don't have these big, people talk about the roller coaster. I think life's a roller coaster anyway. But appreciating that actually those duvet days are fine. As long as we don't decide to live there and put our lives on hold, Yeah, and this is why I love focusing on emotions. And often I didn't have a fertility journey, as I shared, and sometimes people say, you can't work with those struggling with fertility if you've not had your own journey, which clearly I don't agree with. But the reason I don't agree with it, and this is the same for anything, any struggle any person is going through, even if it looks like we've had a similar journey, we can't possibly understand how another person is experiencing that. However, we all understand feelings. So on a feeling level, we can connect. We don't presume to understand, but we can connect. We can understand feelings. And this is, as I say, why for me this emotions work is so powerful.
So just before I let you go, Dany, and you will be hearing more from Dany in my closed Facebook group, so I'll make sure that you know exactly where you can find her, and hopefully you'll be experiencing what we're talking about as I start to share the work I'm doing, and I will be getting Dany to do some lives in the group. Just explain to me a bit about the work that you do in terms of imagining the baby, without going into too much detail of the module because it comes at a very specific point. But I know it's something that I think people would be really interested in hearing about.
Yeah, first of all, as you say, it comes at a very specific point. So up until this module, actually, so that would be, what would it be, session 6, we are focusing completely on the person. So the feelings, the emotions, the ability to cope, all of those things. And it might sound strange because obviously when they come to see us, they're coming because they want a baby. But if we initially start with saying the baby is the goal, so getting pregnant is the goal of our sessions, we don't know how successful we're being until a person gets pregnant. We may never be successful, let's be honest, with some of our clients. So you can't make getting pregnant the goal of your sessions because it's counterproductive from an emotional well-being perspective. Also, unfortunately, if you start talking too soon to a person about, let's be positive about you getting pregnant. Let's focus on a baby coming into your life. And they've had years of that not happening, then they're not going to be able to connect with the work you're doing. However, when we get a person to a really strong place emotionally, so they're seeing those changes, they're seeing that life is different, they're dealing with the emotional stuff that's coming up in a really useful way for them, then we can start having the conversation about that desire, that hope and that dream to have a baby. Now, from a mind-body connection perspective, one of the emotional blocks that can be very, very strong, and I do believe this is why so many of my clients who've had unexplained infertility get pregnant after working with me. My friend Sarita, she had unexplained infertility, as I said, a 10-year journey. A number of my clients is the same. And I believe it's because of the emotional blocks that for some reason, at a subconscious level, there's a message going on that says it's not safe for us to have a baby. Do you remember when we were talking about the emotional stuff? I talked about the cavemen times, and it was very simple for them. Are we safe or are we in danger? When we're in real physical danger, we don't want to get pregnant. You know, our own survival would be compromised if we were pregnant, okay? Now, from a pure emotions, feeling, our lizard brain perspective, if we have a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, that will create a block that says it's not safe for us to get pregnant, okay? Now, the way we get around that, because that part of our brain responds to imagery and emotion, is to be able to fully embrace what we want. And this is on top of all the work that's been done to this point, remember, you know, so it isn't that we start off here. So we get to a stage where it's really useful to say to a client, where is your baby? And I know that some of the Freedom Fertility Formula specialists say, oh my God, is that not cruel for a person who desperately wants their baby? But from a mind-body connection perspective, if that baby's always out there in the future, that's where they remain. There's no connection and harmony from a mind-body connection perspective, from a subconscious and conscious mind perspective that says, this is right, the time is right for me to get pregnant. Okay, so emotionally, it's really useful to be able to connect with that desire from a strong place. And this is why it's at session 6, it's got to come from a strong place. Now, yes, when a person has had loss, it feels even harder to do that. But in my experience, when you sit there and provide a safe space, a loving space, for that person to both either imagine this baby that they want, or these babies that they've lost, they do come through, to connect, it's very, very powerful. And what I see is healing. And it's about the person who's there by their side and how they sit with them in that space that makes it useful. Confidence. And I love the fact that all of my Freedom Fertility Formula specialists worry about this and care about this and are concerned about this, because by sharing with me their concerns, I can help them get to that place of confidence where they can sit comfortably to allow the healing to take place, because they don't have to do anything really other than to sit there and provide this safe, confident, comfortable place for their clients to do their own healing. But it's very, very powerful.
And I think a lot of all of that concern comes from the way we've been brought up, all of us, to not be able to really talk about this difficult stuff. And that's why the work that you do and the work that I've been doing with you has been so fascinating and so relevant, I think, and hopefully so accessible to people, especially if they have been through loss, to know that there are these different ways to be able to then process, to help you whilst you're still trying to conceive. Because as I know, we talked about joy, but a big part of what the work is all about is that people are still hopeful because they are still trying, which is why we're working with them.
Yeah, totally. I believe, sometimes I get people saying, oh, we shouldn't get people's hopes up. But actually, I have a strong belief that if somebody is still trying, they have hope. And I've seen it for myself that when a person decides to stop, having done this kind of work, they do it from a place of peace. They realise that actually it's time for their journey to take a different pathway. So yes, while they're still trying, there is hope, and we want to support that hope, because like I've said, from a mind-body connection perspective, it doesn't serve them to say, oh, I'm not going to get my hopes up, because then they're imagining that baby's never going to turn up in their lives, but also And they're creating stress that says to the subconscious, there's some bad stuff around us. Maybe it's not safe for us to get pregnant right now. So, it's really important for them to be able to come to that place of hope in a really strong way.
So Kate had to leave us before the end of that conversation with Dany. I hope it gives you more of an overview of why she created the formula ultimately, and why I was so excited to be able to learn it. And now I'm going to be helping you by teaching it. Ultimately, it is simple, it is really impactful, and I know you're going to love it. So join me on my closed Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/talk fertility, or check out the link underneath this episode, which will give you all you need in order to sign up, to take part in the challenge and win that amazing competition prize that I mentioned, with a kit from Exceed, from Medichecks, consultations from the lovely Kate Davis and Melanie Brown, and some other goodies thrown in there as well. I know it will be a really brilliant week. Can't wait to see you there. And whilst you've got your phone in your hand, we'd love it if you let us know what you think of this episode by leaving us a review, because it tells other people that this is worth them listening. And especially, whilst we've all been in a different scenario with lockdown, podcasts are having so much attention, which is amazing. And we want to make sure that people know how up to date this podcast is, because you're loving what we're doing. So 5 stars, of course, would be awesome. But just let us know what you think. Rate, review, subscribe and share is what we'd love you to do. You can do it in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Podcatcher is another one that I've found out. It's dead easy, and we love hearing from you. Have a little scroll below the episode in whatever app you're listening to, because it will give you all info about the show, including how you can sign up for my challenge in a couple of weeks. And until the next time,